this conversation was something Oskar brought up because he was semi-joking, but also quite a bit serious about needing to or wanting to be able to do more to develop players in response to, he's been asking around, and the typical response he gets is, well, just get a better one.
Yes, exactly.
That's not always so
really
easy to do in the first place.
That's true. Yeah.
So Oscar's going to lead the questions primarily to Jim. Of course, as always, you guys you're welcome to submit questions. The best way to do it is to use the question and answer function. That way we can see them directly. If you need to, you can throw them into the chat, but sometimes the chat gets a little bit busy and we might miss things if they scroll along. So with that, we'll get going and we'll let Oskar kick things off.
Yeah, so like introduction, I would like to just say what you said already, that the easy answer for every coach is to say, I have to buy new better player, but our job is also to develop players, and making a checklist about after all seasons that they work, and mostly the 2 seasons that I work like a head coach. On my checklist of the development of the player, the libero was on the last position. So I asked myself what I can change, what I can do better for this role. And according to this situation, first is that I realized, I hope I'm wrong, but the libero position is like a, let's say, goalie in football or soccer. That when I was a kid and we were playing soccer around our home place, the last one who was picked, it was a goalie, let's say the lowest quality player. And according to this, I'm watching that sometimes I think we are underestimating this position and sometimes not correctly choosing the player. So the first question is, what is your way to and approach to choose correct person, a player as a libero?
That's a great question. Great question. And I think I can answer it this way, that the first person I gave a scholarship to at the University of Oregon was Katie Swoboda, who was our first libero. She and a lot of people didn't want to give scholarships, at least as the position evolved. People were able to get kids to walk on because there's so many kids that can play that spot that people wanted to get them to walk on. And Terry Pettit, who used to be a coach at Nebraska, when Mick Haley took over as the national team coach going into the 2000 Olympics, one of the things that Terry said to me is that Mick will understand that the first contact is incredibly important. And so that always stuck with me. And so I always felt that you had to have somebody who was as good as they get. And we were very fortunate to get the liberos that we had. We had 3 in a row basically at the University of Oregon that were, I think, awesome. And Amanda Benson, who actually, I guess, started this conversation, when my wife, who was my assistant coach, saw Amanda the first time, basically came back and said, this kid's a difference maker. We need to give her a scholarship. And people were hemming and hawing with her on whether or not she was good enough to give a scholarship, and we gave her the full ride. So in terms of, in your regard, do you pay them? I do know professionally, and those 3 kids, some had played professionally, and well, I guess all of them had, but the money wasn't there. I always thought if I was coaching a professional team, I'd find the best one I could and I would pay them accordingly. I think that's incredibly important, to find somebody who is very good, and there's certainly, I think you have to go to them as they are certainly as important as the setter. They're touching the ball basically the same number of times, if not more. And so I think that's how I would approach that anyway.
Okay. So you are lucky, let's say, that you had this kind of level of all the players. But if you're not, and you have to, let's say you don't have libero in that moment, and you have to choose the one to convince him to play on this position. First, which kind of attitude, what kind of attitude she or he has to have, what kind of skills, and how to convince the player to play as a libero. Because as you said, I'm sure that the most important thing position is the setter. Libero is the last one on like I said last time when we were waiting for you. Everyone wants to spike.
Right.
Everyone wants to shine. Yes, of course, culture of the club can and should push somebody to understand the position of libero. That's super important, like you said. But sometimes, like the kids, like 16, 17 years old. In my team now, I have 21 years old player and super talented guy. Like I love this guy, but I know that with 186, he's not able to reach the highest level of the volleyball. And I had to work with him a lot of time and talk with him a lot of time to convince him you should try this position. But I'm not convinced that he wants to do it. What kind of, I hope you understand my two questions.
I do understand. I think that's a great dilemma. That's a great dilemma, is that, and that's the hard part, in my opinion, is can you convince somebody who doesn't want to do something? And I've always believed you do everything you can to convince them, but if they're not going to do it, they're not going to do it. And I believe the most important thing that you can get is somebody who wants to do whatever you want them to do. And if they want to do it, and I think we can create different things that make it more attractive. I have always, my liberos are basically in charge. We've always make setters captains, and we do et cetera, and I've never worried about who's captain per se. I let that evolve organically, and they figure that out on their own. But I think there are certain roles that you can give a libero that show that they're in charge, and you don't have to appoint them, but say, hey, if we're gonna talk about serve receive, I'd turn to them and say, where do you want people to stand? What do you want people to do? And it's your decision. It's not theirs, because you're the one out here doing this, and I'd put them in charge of different things. And maybe that makes that more attractive, but I do believe very strongly that you got to get somebody who wants to do something rather than make them do something.
Okay, I understand. And in this case, there is also a question, what kind of attributes, because of course, we have to base on the level of volleyball, of technique, yes? Sometimes me as a coach of a professional team, of course, I wish to have libero who is extremely good in pass, super efficient on defense, really good setter, because he has to set also, and really key player like a leadership. But we don't have this kind of options, unfortunately. What are your priorities?
My priorities, what you said, passing. I think that's the first. I've always believed that serve receive is it. It's a good question, men's game versus women's game. I think that's up for debate, and I would have to get a lot more. I'd have to get some specific data, men versus women, in terms of serve receive, in terms of what's the priority. But serve receive has always been my first choice. The interesting thing, the three kids that I talked about, they were dramatically different in personality. They were dramatically different in athleticism, skill, and technique. And I will also say, I can't say never. I rarely am that concerned about technique. I am more concerned about execution. And I don't care if a kid can stand on her head, as long as the ball goes to target, I'm not going to correct her. And I know that sounds extreme, but in so many ways, this is how I was going to start the conversation, that I believe the issue in our sport today, and it's been evolving, and it is now extreme. As I watch teams play, I'm almost bored that everybody's doing the same thing. The technique has taken over dramatically, and the thing that we have forgotten is that as volleyball coaches, we all say this is the ultimate team sport, and yet we coach it like we're coaching track. We coach it like an individual sport. And I think that's the single most important thing. So John said that Joe Skinner, and I actually Joe texted me, said he was going to watch it. And I asked him what he perceived, because he watched me do all this. And I said, what is his perception? And Joe's basically responded by saying, I took everybody and took those three kids, and he used those three because he knew those three, that I took them and let them be themselves within the system. So I kind of would say that, we have this system. What do you guys want to do? Katie played both left and middle back as an example. Amanda was at middle back. Amanda was the tallest and hit. She actually hit in high school and some in club and things like that. Haley was incredibly athletic, and she actually was at one time voted the most athletic in our entire department, and that included all the football players that were in the department. And so she's super athletic, but she played left back because she didn't like to play middle back. And I let her make that decision. And so again, that probably goes back to, can you get people to do it? Get them to do the things they want to do and make everybody around them better. Haley was probably the most outspoken leader. Katie never said a word. And I'm rambling a little bit. And so you're asking what attributes. As an example, Katie, there were a couple of times we had very few people in our spring practices. And I had Katie just play defense by herself. And it was amazing how many balls she would dig, more that she would dig when there was nobody around her, and then if she had two other people. And she was digging more balls than a team would dig. And that goes back to how I started, that it's a team sport. As long as she didn't have to worry about running into anybody, she was awesome. When I stuck people next to her, she got skittish. Rightfully so, because she ran into a lot of people. And so I think we have to create this, that it's the team. It's not about the individual, and it's certainly not about the technique. And I think that's key. And I think that's key how you develop it and make it that you're Demetrius Sands. I'm regressing again. Demetrius Sands, who's probably the best player I've ever coached and had an opportunity, and Mick had her for 2 years, and I had her at 2 years when I was at Texas. And she's probably the best volleyball player I've ever coached. I asked Dee once, I said, what do you think would make you better, passing 1,000 balls with the people you pass with in a match, or passing 10,000 balls by yourself? And she immediately responded, she goes, that's the easiest question I've ever had. It's passing 1,000 balls with the people next to me. And that stuck with me forever, that I think it's important that everybody figure out how to coordinate with one another rather than to do it good as an individual, if that makes sense. That was a lot of rambling, but a lot of stories in there. I think the three people that are playing defense, them coordinating is much more important than one person's technique.
Yeah, completely understand. I have to say that I'm also bored these days. I maybe not stopped 100%, but I decreased the amount of the number of the games that I'm watching on the high level, because I'm getting bored. So I completely agree with you. I'm sorry if somebody disagrees with that, but yes, me too. Yes, that I'm completely agree with this. That this is the one organism that in defense, but I hope you can agree that except technique, the technique. I have to stop technique. There is a one trap in this case, and I can use like a big example. It's Pavel Zatorski, the best one of top 3 liberos in the world, which he has own technique that probably nobody, not even one coach will show to his kid do like this.
Right.
But he arrived to the really high level. But you know, we have to also think about that. Still, volleyball is growing up and still is changing, and technique is the thing that can give you opportunity to survive. With Pavel, I think there is one moment that now he's a little bit struggling more than before, because now everyone has a jump serve for like 110 or 120 kilometers per hour, and or float was amazing, and he will be amazing all the time. But with jump serve, now he's getting a little bit in troubles. So I think technique, of course, like you said, that if you have your own technique and it's efficient, you cannot change him. But we, as a coaches, I believe that we have to follow the technique rules. Like the first thing about this. Do you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So this would be this is what I would say. You know, as I said, if you pass the ball perfectly every time, I'm not going to say anything. But not very many people do that. So, you know, I always want to have that ability to work on the things technically that that everybody needs to work on. So that's incredibly important. But I would also say that it's, and I'll go back to an example that with Dmitry Sands, that, you know, here's Mick Haley, who's one of the best coaches ever. When I got there, Dmitry Sands could not dig a ball going to her left. And so I'm like, I'm a great coach. I'm going to teach her how to dig balls going to her left. And I'll bet I hit 1,500 balls in a couple of weeks trying to get her to go to the left. And finally, I just said, just scoot more to your left and go to your right more often. And I think, and she's the best defensive player I'd ever worked with in my life. And that's literally the only adjustment that I had. And we moved her, and she was playing middle back, and we moved her over probably 5-6 feet towards the right side of the court. And she would still go all the way and dig all kinds of balls everywhere. So she was unbelievable at going to her right. And so we just move her over. And like I say, going to her right, she'd cover the whole area, and we just scooted her over to the left and went over in that direction. So there was an example that there was no way I was going to take that good of a player and get her to make that change. So it was, let's make an adjustment in the system, and people who were playing left back had to know where she was, and everybody who was at right back knew that Dee was going to come over and save her going to the right. So even though she was farther away, and they just had to learn that. But again, I would say that in general, you're going to still have to make sure that everybody's technique can fit in with everybody else's too. That's for sure.
John, do you have some question, or I can go?
Yeah, well, Rita asked the question, what are the mental attributes you look for along with the physical ones?
You know, I would say that I've always, this is my general answer, is I'm looking for the same kind of person the same thing that the setter has, that I want them to lead. They need to be tough. I'll give a story that I guess could get me in trouble again. That when we had Katie Swoboda, and the interesting thing is, I said the most important thing was passing. Katie struggled most in serve reception. She's probably defensively, of the three, Katie might have been the best defensive libero that we had of those three. Katie struggled more in serve receive, and especially early in her career. And we were having a drill, and if Katie got upset, she'd cry. And so she's struggling passing, and she's upset, and she's about ready to cry. And we had somebody that was serving her and they're serving her, and now she's getting worse and worse. And all of a sudden, because she starts crying, the person who was serving her stops serving her. And I was on the other side of the court because I was right behind Katie, so I couldn't see her face, but I knew she was crying. And the girl stopped serving her. And I stopped the drill. And I started walking, and I said, I believe you stopped serving Katie because she was upset. And she didn't really respond because I was not very happy. And Katie now is paying attention instead of crying. And I said, well, congratulations, you just made her worse. And now Katie was livid that this person wasn't pushing her to the point. Katie wanted to get dramatically better and was frustrated that this person wasn't going to continue to frustrate her and make her mad. And you want that kind of personality that will do everything they can to get better. I think that's crucial, is that some kid they got to be tough. And there's no lie, they have to be tough.
You answered another my question, because I work only 1 month with girls, like junior national team, and I had the same situation which I have in my mind if I did it like in correct way, because it was more or less the same, that one girl was struggling a lot during the drill, so her teammate, she was just stopped to serve on her, and I said, come on, opponent do the same thing, we stop, they will push more. But I was not sure, because there was also the tears on here, so it's always my question, it's correct or not, but I believe yes. So thank you. It's another question that I had in my mind. You already answered it. What I can add in like my point of view on mental skills of libero, I completely agree that it has to be like a setup, that leadership is really important. I always try to look for the players. I really like ideas. One idea, maybe you've heard about it, it's the player has to be smart, work harder, ambitious, and nice. So first I'm looking for somebody who is an asshole. Then we can work about it. But also there are two theories that I found, that somebody is looking for the libero who is really calm, stable. I'm looking for more for highly cooperative player, loud player, loudly, which is more presented on the court. I used to work with many liberos, male libero, and I divide them for 2 colors. Or you are colorful, or you are gray. I'm always looking for the player on the court which is colorful, that after the game, if he played good or not good, I know that he was on the court. There are many players that I call them gray. They are doing what they can, but nothing more, not risking. So I'm looking for the brave libero, which is looking for also taking responsibility of teammate, taking the responsibilities, and he's more colorful.
I love that analogy. That's an awesome analogy, gray and colorful. That's a great analogy. And yeah, absolutely, there is no question that that's the case. And I love that idea that, that you had, and I say that the one interesting thing, there's one that I've actually thought of, the difference between coaching men and coaching women. I would demand coaching men that person, that they're on the floor. It's so often, because women generally don't want to be in charge, and I don't mean in general in terms of the athletics, but there is some system. We can ask Kathy DeBoer about that, but women would rather not be out in front. And so you will get at times that they are not the ones that want to be out front, where men, I think if I was coaching men, I would demand to have a libero, even perhaps more than a setter. I would demand a libero that is someone who's willing to take charge.
Yeah. Okay, now so we talk a little bit about technique, not specifically, but the technique is important. I think we all agree that the reading in this position is the key point. Now, I will give you an example that, for example, I am on the team right now. Before I used to work with a team who can go to the sports hall, And if you want to stay there 4 hours, you stay there 4 hours, and you can organize the practice as you want. Now I am in the team that you have only 2 hours, specifically from time to time. And so I'm looking for the correlations like warm up with balls, also adding a lot of touches, contacts for libero. And I am on the point that I would like that every time my outside hitter, my opposite, will spike on libero. And this is the reading. He has to know where to stay. But as lower category of the team you have, then the accuracy of the spike is getting lower. And sometimes after 50 spikes, my libero can touch 4 or 5 times the ball. So now my question is, should I go to the boxes and just spike from the boxes to give him an executions, touches, contacts, but this is not a reading.
Right.
How to resolve this problem? What kind of idea do you have in your mind?
Wow, that's a great question. There's a couple of things that I wanted to say earlier that I think is crucial, and then I'll get to that. That kind of going back to where we're talking about how everybody's doing the same thing, that we focus on technique in this day and age, and the only time that we play, and it's especially true in this country, that all we do is wash drills and they're just competing. And I think it's important that they learn how to compete. But when we do team stuff, all they're doing is playing. And I think, and that's what made me hit on when your question is that instead of teaching them to read or helping them to learn how to read, we are just competing. And one of the things that I have always done on those people, whether I'm working on them reading, is if we're playing, I try to never stop the drill. And I would always be talking to them about things that they could do to learn how to read. So that that feedback is coming all the time. And whether it's where you're going to look at their hand, are you going to look at their thumb? I mean, you can get down to little details like that to know where they're going to hit so that you learn how to read. What do their feet look like? What do their hips look like? And what is their tendency to do all those things? I think that's one key that you can, when you're able to still hit, because that was part of your question, is to give them more, to force them to learn how to read every time rather than just try to dig the ball. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
To teach them how to do that. When it gets to the point that you have to do it, it's a great question. I tried to never stand on a box equals hitting. And there's plenty of times that I would stand on a box and hit balls. I want to say never, but that's not true now that I think about it. There were times that I would stand on a box and force them to do it, but I think that you really never learn how to completely read unless you're in a game-like situation. So you can work on reading skills and talk about where I'm holding my hand. Do I turn it this way? And you got to see that so that now I'm going down the line rather than going cross court. Those kinds of things, and you could do it on a box. And I have done it on a box, forcing my hand to go one way so that they're doing at least nothing but focusing on my hand rather than focusing on a big, gigantic picture. And I think that's part of those kids that learn to read well. They learn to focus on those things that are important in a match. And I think that comes with experience. And you can at least give them the narrow focus on a box where you have to force them to have a narrow focus in a 6-on-6 kind of competition.
Yeah, I understand everything, but I would like to extend a little bit this question using by big example. Coming back to this player that I convinced now to be a libero last season, I had an injury in the team. My first libero was injured, and I have to react in some way. So I asked this guy, "Can you practice this week as a libero and play next Saturday on this position?" He said yes. And after all season, when I love to talk with my players, I ask all of them, almost all of them, because of this Corona, but. What do you think about practices? Did you enjoy? Do you feel it was pushing for you? It was challenging? Many of these questions. And this guy answered me like this: 95% of the season I loved. The only 1 week that I really hated, it was the week when I was libero, and not because I don't want to play on this position. It was boring for me because I don't have many possibilities to touch the ball. And I would start to thinking about it. Okay, when you play, you are practicing like game-like situation using 6 against 6. And for example, as a spiker, as a setter, as a middle blocker, you have many opportunities to touch the ball. You serve, you block, you spike, you set. As a libero, sometimes you have to wait 5 minutes to touch one ball, because we are talking more about men volleyball. In volleyball, women volleyball is completely different. But
Right.
sometimes on the men's volleyball, it's one rally, bam, bam, no chances to touch the ball for libero. My thing is that it's really difficult sometimes to use libero like contacts, because sometimes you're waiting for your opportunity or for your chance. Then you have the ball on the hands and the ball is full. Technically, well, you were okay, but you are waiting 5 minutes. You don't have repetitions. You are not in the game, like I like to call. That's my key point and my key idea what to do during the practice to make always, because the feedback from all the players, they said, I was always involved in the practice in 100%. I never missed something. But libero's answer was, I was missing something. And now that like the construction of the practice makes me really difficult. How to do it?
That's a yeah. As you mentioned that, I thought about it. It is tough being a male libero. One way you might want to do it is to develop drills that initiate with the libero. Maybe it's a hard driven ball that you're going to hit at them. That's how you start the rally.
Yes, that's my first idea.
Yeah, I would do that, and actually I have thought about that with men, that I would, and it would be great if the first drill, and I remember as a player that hitting it at somebody was incredibly difficult. That, our coach used to just yell at us that we were supposed, we had a drill that the first 2 contacts had to be, you had to go twice over the net before you could actually start to play hard. And we couldn't hit it at one another. And he just lost his mind that we couldn't do that. And that might be an idea, that you have a contact where the first swing has to go, you still have the block, they have to avoid the block and hit it at the libero, wherever that person may be. And then they got to dig it. And now you start whatever 6-on-6 drill that you have. And that might be a way to do that.
Yeah, that's my first and last idea for this morning.
I can't think of anything else.
The thing that I would insert in here, just from a bigger picture of looking at this, is what you described, Oskar, is exactly the game. You might go 5 minutes without ever touching the ball.
Yes,
libero.
I know it.
So to a degree, you need to train that. You need to train that concentration to be ready for that one time in 10 minutes that you touch the ball. So we can't necessarily just go, okay, I'm going to get as many contacts from my libero as I can all the time, because what happens in a game when they're not getting the contacts? Are they still staying engaged?
That's completely true. I have also, that's in my mind from first beginning, that's the game. That's the game. But finally, what I'm thinking about it is that finally you are reaching the point that if you are not satisfied about your libero, you will buy new one, better one. Because if he's not efficient in this kind of work, we are looking for a better one. but my job is to work with mine too. So I would like to make the best libero of the world with my 20 years old kid. So I have to give him an opportunity also to practice in not game-like situations, let's say. Or adding like, Jim?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you know, there's two thoughts. I had two thoughts to that. Is that the one thing that you're trying to do is to get them so they want to do it, which is huge key to make them. So if all of a sudden somebody who hasn't been playing that position, you need them in that spot, and they hate it because they don't touch it for 5 minutes. It is nice to figure out a way to get them so that they're not bored and that they want to play that position. The other thing that when you ask the question, and it's a way to get, maybe perhaps find somebody that has that kind of characteristic, is when you did that, is I thought of Eric, and I've always thought of Eric Sato, who was on the men's US team for a long time. And before there was a libero, and he would only come in and basically have one time in the back row, the impact that guy had in the Olympics as going across the back row one time was one of the most amazing things that has stuck with me for my entire life. That here he was just barely in the game and had a huge, huge impact on almost every set that he was in there. And I don't know whether you could show him film of that guy coming across, and just the team felt better when he walked on the floor. And so to have that kind of, I mean, he's a pretty special human being, but to have that kind of impact is big.
Yeah, and I think one of also really important factor to be a really good libero on defense, John. I've lost you. You want to ask something, John? Because I've lost you for a second.
No, I was just gonna. Do you see Michael's question? Or not? It's not so much a question. It's the last one on the list about what happens when what you can do after a missed serve. You can require the next serve goes to the libero as a way to get more libero touches.
Yes, and then this is also one thing that when my team is, for example, not so advanced like a tactic way, that also gives me a lot of troubles, because if I see playing 6 against 6, the team is serving always on libero, I have to react and say we are learning to play to win. How many times you're gonna serve next Saturday into libero? And on 10 hour services, we did 9 on libero. This is not tactically good. And this is right. Jim, you understand me? I'm trying to find a balance between how to develop libero, but also to play real volleyball. Because right. On Saturday, nobody will serve on libero. Will point on my worst receiver. So yes, I understand the position, and probably I will do more like this, that every second serve has to be on libero if we missed the first one. But in general, this is not volleyball. This is not a game like Saturday.
Yeah, the one thing that I try to always do is design different drills for different things. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty funny. I could probably pull up 5 drills that you could ask our players that, you know, what would you be willing to kill one of them for? There's 5 drills. They would use those, and they were brutal. So those were just for competition drills. And then there were drills that we had to try to figure different things out. And even though they were trying to win, they might be trying to win. It might be something specific that maybe you have to beat the libero, you know, defensively in some ways, that they're still competing rather than it's just competing. And you need those competition drills because there's no question that people need to learn to compete at the highest level they can. So that you have to have some drills that are doing nothing but trying to kill the other team. And that you want that. But then perhaps we can design some drills that you have to specifically to make it harder. And so it's just the scoring is differently or something along that line.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. There is one question that I also would like to ask you about physical preparation specific to libero. Frederick asked, what about physical preparation specific to libero? What is the aspect that you think interesting to train more in prevention and develop the physical parts? I have some ideas, but I would like to first hear about what's your idea.
I'm going to say for sure I'm not the expert in terms of the weight room training. The one advantage that I had over the last few years of my career is I had some great people who were training them in a weight room, but that was one of the things that I specifically would say to our strength and conditioning people is that there's no way that the libero should be doing the same thing that a middle blocker is doing in terms of in the weight room. And so they would design specific things. So the women much more so than men, but I think men, it's the case. We would always talk about to get in a good defensive position, to dig a ball that's right in front of you. And I would always, I love to do this to them, which would drive them crazy. I just bounce a ball 3 feet in front of their feet and they can't dig it. You know, with some pace, and I would just get it, and you try not to have it bounce up and hit them in the face, but it's that ball is very difficult. And the reason that ball is difficult is because they don't have the ability to be low and to get as low as they can and push straight forward to go get that. So I think they have to have the ability, whether it be in squats, but to get their body in a position so that they can get their hips as low as they possibly can, to push their hips to go straight under the ball so that their arms go under the ball, so that their hips go straight, stay low, and go straight under where they're trying to get. And so it's that physical preparation of being able to be down and be down there longer than a middle blocker, for example, for sure, because those are the things that they have to do. And so there's some plyometric things that can be done. There's a lot of stuff in the weight room that was done differently, from everything from squats to just getting them in a position so that they could get their hips as low as they possibly can.
Here on the list of the participants, I'm sorry because I don't know a lot of you, but here we have Eduardo Romero, one of the experts of physical strength conditioning, and working in Turkey now. He was also a physical coach in national team, Poland women's national team. For sure he's better, but I believe I spoke with many of them, and yes, that's true that we have to little bit change the physical preparation for libero. Working a lot about mobility, of hip mobility and ankles mobility. That's the key point, I think. Also core stability, that's important. What I've heard about the feedback from some key players was that not working a lot about strength or power of upper body, just dynamic work, but we have to work about the prevention. Mostly, we cannot forget because we are talking about the footwork or the strength of the lower body, but we have to also take responsibility of the prevention of the arms, because if they dive, if they do all these unnatural movements, they are falling down, and we have to prevent it, working a lot. But this is more for the specialists, I believe. We are coaches mostly. So
right.
Balance, yes.
Balance, I think.
Ability.
Again, I go back to the player that I had the most balance was Demetrius Ants. And that's the one key that made her a phenomenal player, is just having that balance. And some of that stuff can be done, can be enhanced in the weight room, but having balance is huge as a libero.
Can you describe the key points of defense position? I think it's not a big difference between men's and women's volleyball. So I would like to hear what's your main idea about defense?
You mean in terms of position on the court?
The technique position.
Position
on the court, it comes from the system that we have completely different, and every coach has a different system, yes? So position on the court, it's completely...
So posture.
The posture, yes.
Your posture, yeah, the posture. You know, that it's funny because I had one key, and I there were a lot of things that would be, you know, I tried to only have 3. Sometimes there were more. But when it came to defense, I had basically one key, and that was just get low. And so, and it's interesting because, for example, in serve receive, I would tell people to put their hands on their knees and then get their hands off, and that is a pretty good way of looking at serve receive. I didn't want you to be super low because, one, you can take the ball with your hands. I mean, you can on defense too, but I wasn't that concerned about it being low as I was on defense. And defense, it was just basically being low. And can you touch the ground? And so I would talk a lot of so much I would talk about, can you just naturally, can you be low enough when the ball is contacted to be low enough to touch the ground easily, that it's just a natural thing. And I would, that would be me getting low was the key. And then you're reading and staying low to that movement. And I didn't care about when you were low. I would say be stopped prior to contact. That was probably something I said constantly, is that people who want to read and even learn how to read, we have this tendency to be moving as they're contacting the ball. And I would say, I don't care where you are. Once contact is made, you have to have the ability to go all 4 directions and up and to the floor as they hit the ball. It's more important to be able to move rather than to be moving because you think they're going to hit it to one particular spot. Because I think most mistakes on defense are made, or we make 2 mistakes. We think they're going to hit it someplace, and then we don't go because they don't hit it where we think they're going to hit it. And I want you to, okay, if you make the mistake where they hit it, where you think they're going to hit it, I want you to have the ability to at least correct and go back to go where the ball went rather than where you thought it was going to go.
Actually, it's really similar to one thing that I heard about French School of Defense. My friend of mine did the diploma there, and I asked him what they do, the specific thing about defense. Tell me something, what they do, because they are amazing. And he said the first difference between Paul and Polish thing about the defense was that we are not defending the position, we are defending the ball. That's our focus. We don't think where to stay. We have to defend the ball. So, and this is also the question. Probably I know the answer because in women's volleyball it's not so often. But do you practice with your libero also in position 6, on different position, or only in position 5? Because tendencies now in men's volleyball is, for example, U.S. national team last year on World Cup, Shoji was defending in position 6. So, what do you think about it?
That to me, that's a great question. That's the one thing I wanted to talk about. To me, it's amazing. I say this all the time, and I've said it to our players, gosh, at least 15, maybe 20 years. That if you take American football, how many different defenses do American football teams have? Even if you took high school teams, they are running sometimes 10 different defenses. And yet in volleyball, we run one defense. And I say why. And especially at the higher levels, when we now all have access to volumetrics and we have this huge analytics of where people are going, why is a libero standing in one spot? If that's the person you want to dig the ball, why are they not going to where the person who hits the ball to that spot? I don't care whether it's in right back, middle back, or left back. Why are they not standing there? I didn't do enough of that. But I think that's my point. I think we should create different defenses against different teams and against different players. And perhaps the libero can change positions based on the hitter. I think that's crucial. And that's the tactics of the sport that again, when we talked about what's boring, I think the answer to your question is, why wouldn't you change? instead of everybody doing the same thing, I think it should be predicated on the team or the individual hitter. But if a team attacks a certain spot, why wouldn't you go there? And as an example, I mean, and Joe, who's on here, one time said we had like, I don't know, 15 different defenses. I never thought of that, but we probably had, we had basically 4 different defenses that we played. And against UCLA one time, they had 2 kids that could absolutely crush the ball to the deep corner. Well, and they didn't hit the ball down the line. We literally stood 3 people in the corner, and they both hit under 100 that night, and they were both All-Americans, and they refused to hit the ball. They could have just tipped the ball and killed us. And we just stood there and dug ball after ball after ball. And why wouldn't teams do that more often? And so to answer your question, I think you should play where you think you scout your opponent best.
Now we comes to the question that more like an idea, because I was researching a lot about the system in Poland, in all Europe. When nation starts to do specification on role, and mostly I've heard that in age 15, the kids, they are starting to be libero. So talking about, like you said, that the libero should be able to defend not only 5, 6, 1. Why they start so early in this age, forgetting about it, because I understand that if you are a middle blocker, you need more time to understand this role, but you can still follow like specification of outside here is the same. The position, libero position, is nothing that you do. You have to do something extra that nobody other does on the court. You are just making less. Why coaches decide to cut wings, let's say, for these players, and just pushing them for this specific role?
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? Or
yeah, I agree with that completely. I think that goes back to how do you make it so they want to do it, is make them in charge of that. Put them in charge of saying that, so they have access to, it depending on the level. If it's a higher level and they have access to the scouting videos and analytics that come through, for example, on volumetrics or on data volley, all those things that we have, is that to have them look at it and say, we need to do this, to sit down with you, and they come up with a game plan. You can come up with a game plan together on how you're going to defeat the team, and they can make adjustments to make them a coach on the floor. That's, when we talked about what are the things that we want for libero, we want a kid who's going to be the coach on the floor. That's really the color, having to be a bright color, is that somebody takes over and is a coach on the floor and gets on the person who's next to them and say, why are you digging that one spot when they're hitting it over here? Move over there and I'll be right here. And those kinds of things, I think those are the things that we can do to make it so that they want to play that position, that they know they're in charge of the defense that's going on the floor.
I think Oskar, in terms of what's happening with the juniors, I suspect that one of the things that pushes people to specialize them a little earlier than maybe is great is this is going to be less of a factor in boys because they obviously physically mature later. But for girls, at 15 or so, most of them are pretty close to physical maturity. They've grown about as much as they're going to grow. So you know who's going to be tall and who's not. You know who's going to be a hitter and who's not. Mm-hmm. So at that stage, they can kind of physically specialize. Whereas I think in the boys game, you could probably go a couple years beyond that and, get closer to 18 and be fine. Just a thought.
Yes, I spoke with juniors coaches here in Poland, and most of them, they were agreed that to specialize this position should be like age 17, 18. Not before, but like a program is said that this moment you should go like 15, you should start to worry about libero. But I don't believe it's so necessary to work so fast only about 4 skills.
Yeah, I wish I would give anything in the United States if at the junior club levels we didn't make anybody any position, maybe no position until 16s maybe, and then at 16s I wish we wouldn't have a libero. I would, and it would be nice to interchange kids that are middle blocking, outside hitting. I get rid of this specificity until 18s. It would be great, but it's never going to happen because, you know, in the United States, clubs make money because they can have 4 liberos on a team, and 2 of them are liberos and 2 of them are DSs, and nobody plays all the way around. At least internationally, those kids are forced to play all 6 rotations, and we're just not forced to do that in the United States.
Yeah, exactly. Agreed.
Okay. I would change a little bit the topic. I believe in college, not in pro level, it's not so obvious, but still happens. And I saw even with national team players, this kind of thing. What do you do with the player who is afraid of ball?
Wow. Yeah. That, and you know, that's funny because I think, well, I'll put this that way because I've done a lot of things with many different sports, and so I like that. And it's pretty interesting because I was talking about my son, who's a baseball player, and we're talking about him hitting, and he's a pitcher, and he can pitch. And I was saying to a person who actually was the sports psychologist for the Seattle Mariners, and I said, well, you know, I just don't think he can hit because he's afraid of the ball. And he turned to me and he says, do you have any idea how many major league players are scared of the baseball? And I'm like, are you serious? And that hit me. And because that's a great question. I think, and I use that story because I think the reality is there's a lot of us that are just able to overcome that. The one thing that I would always try to, because I think everybody's scared of the ball, and I am too. I always try to get them in a defensive position so that their hands are outside their knees, because everybody has a tendency to put their hands inside their knees to force it. And I would literally say, so you can get your hands up in front of your face, no matter how hard somebody hits the ball. And that can help. So that hands get there quickly and at least can keep you from getting hit. You know, the only person that I know of that never seemed to be afraid of the ball was Katie Sobota, who I said was our first libero, and she got hit more in the face than anybody I've ever known in my life. If it was concussion protocol in this day and age, they probably would have taken her out. But I do think a lot of people are afraid of it, and I think you just have to keep working with that and teach them that to teach them to get their hands, that they can get their hands up quickly enough so that they are not going to get hurt. If you can convince them of that, then they can go through and play.
What I do is that if I see a player is afraid of the ball, I'm hitting 10 times consecutively. I'm stopping a drill and I'm hitting one, but I'm afraid a little bit that it can be a little bit traumatic. And I can pass the line, let's say, borderline. But in generally, that's my intention. But I'm looking also, that's why I'm asking. Maybe there are, because if I see the player is
Eastern
doing
European
like this,
old school.
yes, I'm from old Russia.
That's an advantage that you have in Poland. You're not going to do that at the college level in the United States, that's for sure.
Yes. But I know that one day I will pay for this kind of solution.
Yes, sure.
Okay, now one specific question. I'm close to finish. Because do you have some different technique for setting for libero? I mean, of course, if overhead set, not bag, overhead set.
I don't have a different way that I would teach setting. Again, this sort of shows you what I was like, is that my wife, who was my assistant coach, was a setter and a great setter. She takes the ball dramatically different than almost everybody. She was on the national team for a while, takes the ball really high, really far away from her hands, and was unbelievable with her thumbs. She could do things with her thumbs. And I think that when we shape the ball, we stop using our thumbs as much as we can. And a lot of times, I would do this with young kids, but I did do it with liberos, that you set with nothing but your index finger and your thumb, and sometimes only your thumb, that you can just set it, it's just sort of guides with that to get them so they have the strength to be able to push with their thumbs. So that's just that I did with all setters and young kids. But I think that's one thing that we don't do enough of, that, you know, your thumbs are a lot stronger than your fingers. And I had a tendency to work on using their thumbs more, and thus using their whole hand. I mean, obviously you don't want somebody setting like this. You want them using their whole hand, but we have a tendency to set this way more than set this way.
I'm fine. I think, or maybe if you can say me your 3 drills, favorite drills of the defense.
Well, I'm going to say one that is my least favorite, and this was this actually came from, well, a lot of my drills came from Bill Neville, but I saw Bill Neville do this with the men's national team, that they would have 3 people play defense with no block, and guys just unload. You couldn't bounce it straight down because obviously it would go on the floor, and the guys had to dig 10 balls before they'd get out. And I hate that drill. It becomes boring. My wife loves it. I hate it. I would do that. We like that drill. The other thing that I would do is I had defense against a Leibach, and I would just play it out. And this is the one where we're talking about how can a libero be part of it, is that we would literally give free balls to the other side, and they would just hit, and you had to dig X number of balls, and they were transitioned, that you got a swing out of it, and would take care of that. One other drill that I would say that we did often, that I guess I'll give you 2 that are not thought of as defensive drills, but one was a drill that a dear friend of everybody at Oregon Volleyball that we now, that's gone, that we loved it. He named it the Iceman drill, and he named it the Iceman drill because it's from Top Gun, where you go around and he flies ice cold until you do something stupid, and then he's got you, and you weren't supposed to do anything stupid. So we basically played 3 on, well, we had a setter, so it was 3 people on defense and a setter against both sides, and you played regular volleyball except for you attacked from the back row and you could not jump. And it seems incredibly boring, but the setters could win the game by setting the ball over the net. And what it did was force people to be in their defensive positions and to work hard to get back, because you can't hit the ball down. And so, but the setters could set the ball basically right over the net. So on the second contact, you have to expect the ball coming over from the setter, and then you have to immediately get back after they set it, because it's going to go land at the 25-foot line. And it seems like a very simple drill, and it's kind of a ball control drill, and people think of it as a ball control drill, but it became an incredibly important defensive drill because it forced people to have movement. And so you couldn't stand in one place with a ball control drill, and you couldn't be there, because the setters, and if the setter sets the ball over the net, and the setter couldn't jump either, but if the setter sets the ball over the net and it landed, game, you lose. That was one of those drills that I said that was incredibly competitive. Our team that was in the Final Four, Lauren Plum, who was our setter, and Elena Bergsma, who was the National Player of the Year, I purposely always put them on opposite sides, and they would just literally yell at one another the entire time because they got mad at so-and-so would score. And it becomes an incredibly competitive drill, and you work on ball control. Another drill that I like for defense is a drill of 15 where the ball has to travel over the net at approximately 80% to 75% pace. So you're not hitting it full out, but it has to travel over the net 15 times. And you still have 3 people on defense, and every time you hit, you rotate out. So you're rotating people in and out. And so they're hitting the ball hard, but they're not trying to get a kill, but you have to get it over 15 times. So defense becomes incredibly important on both sides of the net, that everybody's got to be digging the ball. And the advantage that our kids learn is I never talked about this, but there was a competitive glitch that when you hit, you had to be subbed out. Well, they would leave the liberos in there. So a way of getting more contacts is that they would always leave the liberos in there, and they dig, they could stand and dig all day long. As long as you didn't set them, they could stay there. And so those are drills that I think that are just kind of defensive specific. Some are team, but the last 2 are they're kind of ball control drills, but I think they really help a lot on defense.
Interesting, really interesting. Thank you very much.
All right, we've got a few questions. Some of them we'll roll back to the beginning of the conversation. I'm going to cluster a couple of them. Jason wants to know, what do you feel is more important, to be skilled or athletic when looking for a libero?
Skilled. I'm going to leave it at that. I think it's incredibly important to be athletic. If I take, Haley Jacob, who was incredibly athletic, and she was much more athletic than skilled, and her athleticism, won out in the long run. But Amanda Benson was incredibly skilled and may not have been as athletic as some, but that's, serve receive is forget about just serve receive. Taking the ball on your forearms is a unique skill. There's no place other. It's either the end of your appendage or an extension to the end of your appendage. Taking a ball that's not on the end of your appendage is unique. And so having that ability to do that, I think, is most important.
Okay. Melena wants to know, what are the advantages of having a tall libero besides the length of their reach?
I don't know if that's if there's anything besides that. I think, again, it extends. You can play farther up. You can do there. But that goes to having their reach. The other thing is serving. You can have that as an advantage too.
Actually, that question is also coming from my doubts. That sometimes,
is that right?
Yeah, sometimes we are choosing really fast liberos because they are not high enough, tall enough. But maybe we are missing really big liberos. They can play really good on that position, but we are looking for other type of the player. But maybe we are making a mistake. I don't know that. If you are bigger, then you have more platform, more place to cover the court. That's the first thing that I have in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, that all goes to that having that long reach. I agree. I think that we just automatically take the smallest kid and make him a libero, and I'm not sure that should be the case.
Okay. Going back to the question of colorful and gray, is it possible to have all of these, quote, leader players on the court all colorful? We also want an opposite that has a killer instinct. That's from Rodrigo.
And Oskar needs to answer this question too, but I'll answer it this way: that at least in college, in women's college volleyball, Russ Rose proved you can do that. The teams that he had that just literally dominated everybody. Russ, in my opinion, is perhaps the best coach, not just in college volleyball history, but maybe in NCAA history in any sport. And he took those kids that all were dominant personalities, that all were colors, and made them a team that literally that lost 2 sets in an entire season. And so, yeah, I do think that's possible, but Oskar needs to answer that question too. I think that's a great one.
My answer is maybe not so meritoric, but using more examples, that if you have a painter like Picasso, sometimes you think that it's not correct shape, but there's something inside. And if you have a lot of colors on the paint, on the sheet, everything is okay and it's fine. But if I take now the sheet and I will try to paint, there will be a lot of colors, but no shape. So it depends what kind of colors do you use. I believe that if all team will be colorful, not gray, then you will always have a good relation in the court and good spirit on the court. But you have to take care about which color you take, like meritoric. About the opposite, if you need killer, if you want to watch Hitman or Silent Killer, they are not like full of emotion, energetic. They are like Russians, bold one, no emotions. So I think in opposite role, if you need a killer, really killer, in this position, maybe it's the one that you don't need a lot of color. You need execution. You need execution. In the other roles, colors are really important.
Okay. All right. This question from Simon, mostly related to youth. How do you make sure that your tactical system doesn't handicap learning to read? So, for example, some kids run over the court and try to take every ball. I suggest that's good to implicitly learn to read. On the other hand, they have to learn that they are not responsible for every ball. So taking balls that they are not primarily responsible for, but missing balls they are responsible for is a no-go. So how do you handle that dilemma?
That's interesting with the no-go. One of the stats that I take on defensive that I've never heard anybody else take is I take percentage of balls dug, and it becomes relatively subjective. And I have a go, no-go stat that I show them, that if you don't go for a ball that hits the floor, I don't care how hard it's driven, if you don't go, you get a no-go. And so and you can do that at any level, that it's pretty easy to keep if you just, and even as a head coach at a low level with 12-year-old kids, you can keep go, no-go. And I've done that, but I think there's 2 parts to it. That's an incredibly complicated question. That you can say, well, they got to go get balls. But I do think, and that goes back to my concept of team versus individual, that I think that's the key. So crossing patterns, this would be the example, and I didn't really answer this to Oskar when he talked about what do I do differently. For example, I have my middle back on a ball that's hit cross court. So if it's attacked from the left side of the court and hit cross court going to our left side of the court, I have middle back cross in front and left back is going to the corner. It's digging the ball to the corner. So they cross behind. I think crossing and making sure people don't run into one another as they cross, both people have to go for the ball, but then they cross knowing they're not going to have a collision, thus making fewer no-goes because people are worried about running into one another.
Okay. All right. We've got 2 last questions that I think kind of go hand in hand. Starts with Joe asking, how did you prepare your liberos for matches and practices? And there's a follow-up from Frederick about what about the responsibilities of the libero in the game and the link between the bench and the game tactics. So I think they kind of roll together.
Yeah, again, I think I'll answer the latter part first. In terms of communication, is that I always try to set it up so that, again, that I'm talking in practice, I'm talking to them while the game's, not literally while the game's going on, but every little break that I would have, and even sometimes in the middle of play, are you watching this, are you watching that? So that in the middle of a match, I could try to have conversations, sort of speak. They have to be very cryptic and quick, but to still have the ability to communicate in the middle of a game on making minor adjustments. And so if I go back to the beginning, I tried to have my libero be in charge of figuring out what defense we had. So when we developed the game plan, I would ask them, what defense do you think we should play against this team or against this specific hitter? And they would answer that to the team. So they were announcing what defense we're playing against a specific hitter or against a specific team. And so that, I think that's, in terms of preparation, that's what we tried to do, is that they were the ones identifying what defense we're playing on that given match.
That's really interesting. There's one thing that maybe I'm missing a little bit, that I have to give more responsibility during match preparation for the libero. It makes him more important, because usually I'm using my scouts, my game plan, giving to the libero, and then you are the boss. You are leading now defensive system, but maybe giving him more responsibilities about the preparation, that he has to bring me his own ideas, which I have also with my setter. With setter, I'm working like that.
Right.
But with libero, thank you. That's really interesting. I have one more question, if I can, because I forgot probably the most important one. I don't know if you ever work with one libero inside the team. Have you ever worked with one libero? Or do you have two liberos?
I've actually had a team where I only had one setter. So I've definitely only had one libero. And generally, I always have had that even those people who were the backup libero, it's always been one libero, that they knew they were it and that was it. So there was always somebody who could take their place, but in general, it has been that person is it, that they're no different than the backups, then they're no different than the starting setter. They're the starting libero and they are it.
Yes, that's true. But now the question is, if you don't have nobody behind you, where is the motivation engine? How do you motivate him to push him to be a better? That's the challenge that I'm looking for. I found now, because if you don't play good, if I'm not happy for your performance, I can change you. If I have a second bench player, if I don't have libero, and you know all season you will play good or not, but you will be on the court, how to create an environment of progress?
Yeah, that's, I remember at the AVCA convention one year, Al Skates said, how to create a great team. And so here's the great Al Skates that was going to stand up and tell everybody how to do this. And he walked up and said, all you need is a blue curtain. And all of us looked at one another like, what is this crazy man talking about? And all he did was, he said, you need 20 guys on the other, you put 12 guys on one side and 20 guys who want to just kill those to get on the other side of the blue curtain. And it made tons of sense. I've never had that opportunity to be able to do that. And that's, in some ways, that's how you get in trouble, I guess, because to motivate somebody who's not motivated becomes very difficult. So if I would answer it this way. If I had somebody who wasn't motivated to be it and to be the best person they could possibly be, and they had to be my libero, and they were going to take nights off because nobody was going to beat them out, then I'd find somebody else. I would create another libero, and I would, again, I'll go back to Russ Rose. I thought Russ, if all the people that I've known, if you didn't perform, he would take you out. It didn't matter that the replacement was going to be horrible. He would take you out. And so I don't know that you need another libero. Just throw anybody in there who's going to take their place. And that's, I think that may be what you have to do. But hopefully I tried to create people that it mattered enough whether the team was successful, that you were willing to stay in there even when you weren't performing at your best?
I understand what you mean, but for example, in my case this year is that I cannot say that my player was not motivated. But what I'm asking myself is that if you have just one player on this position and he's playing, I'm talking about European system, 60% in pass, my job is to put him, to doubt, make him doubts that maybe you can be on 70. And now if you have on your back your second libero who is 58, that's also the really good pressure that, okay, he's coming, I have to be better. Because if you play good and everyone said, I'm good enough to be on this position, then motivation is maybe maintain on the same level, maybe it's dropping down. And as a coach, I have to push him. Maybe you should be a 70. You understand what I mean? That sometimes missing the second guy on the back is also lack of engine of motivation, like I like to say, I love to call it, engine of motivation.
Yeah, I would say that then if that's the case, then I would go back to what I said about Russ, that he didn't care. You have to be willing, at least on any given moment, to sacrifice a match perhaps, to take somebody out, and just take them out. Even if you know that the person who's going in is not as good, just take them out. And if they, and I will say that that's one thing I wished I was better at as a coach. To just go, nope, you're not performing at the level that you're capable of performing, so I'm taking you out. And I'm putting somebody in who I know is worse, but I know you can be better.
Okay. I understand.
All right.
So thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much. That was awesome. I mean, yeah, you have a lot more expertise than I do, perhaps. But it was nice of you to let me at least express what I had to say. So, thank you.
Thank you. And let's stay in touch.
Yeah.
Yes, let's do that, please. That would be great.
I'll send you an email soon.
Okay, very good. And thanks to everybody who came out and asked all the questions.
Thank you, Oscar. Thanks,
Thank
John.
you, Jim. Thank you, John.
Very, very much.
And thank you for all of you. Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right.